Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you to our witnesses, to our members of Congress that are here, and to all of those of you in the audience and those who are watching on the live stream. I'm Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal. I'm the ranking member of the Immigration Subcommittee of the House Judiciary Committee, and I want to welcome you to this hearing entitled Kidnapped and Disappeared: Trump's Attack on Our Children. This is our 7th hearing in a series that I have been holding to bring to light the many ways in which Donald Trump and his administration are destroying our immigration system and trampling on our constitutional rights, and to hold this administration to account for the cruelty and the lawlessness that we are seeing, given that our Republican colleagues refuse to do so. Today's hearing will focus on how the Trump administration's actions are hurting all of our children, with opening statements from our witnesses, questions from our members, and a timer to keep track for both witnesses and members. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. Since Donald Trump was sworn in 14 months ago, DHS has terrorized our children. Today, 4.4 million U.S. citizen children live with at least one undocumented parent. In the first 7 months of Donald Trump's term, more than 11,000 U.S. citizen children have had a parent detained. That means that every single day, an average of 50 U.S. citizen children have had a parent detained. And if that pace holds up to the current moment, that number would have roughly doubled. At the same time, under Donald Trump, every night, roughly 170 children are held in a prison in South Texas. And according to the data, which do not include the surge of arrests in Minneapolis, Minnesota, or children who are in custody at Border Patrol, as many as 400 children were incarcerated on a single day. Trump campaigned on deporting the, quote, worst of the worst, but that is absolutely not what he is doing. Instead, he's cruelly ripping apart families, detaining people of all statuses. He's restarted the cruel practice of detaining families and children, and he's forcing more and more children to appear alone in court as he cuts funding for legal representation. Let's start by talking about what it looks like for Trump's ICE to go after parents. In Washington State, my home state, ICE arrested a mother dropping her 4-year-old son off at preschool. In Oregon, masked ICE agents broke the car windows and arrested a father dropping off his young son at preschool. In Chicago, ICE dragged a daycare worker out of the facility, slammed her face against the daycare's glass doors, and arrested her. And recently in Vermont, the community surrounded a home for hours as ICE sought to enter without a warrant. Demonstrators created a human tunnel, allowing a 4-year-old child wrapped in a blanket to escape her home. Her mother was desperate to get her to safety. Having a parent kidnapped and disappeared is bad enough, but too often ICE is using violence to arrest parents right in front of their children, or even as bait, as we saw with the horrific case of 5-year-old Liam Ramos, the young child with the bunny ears that galvanized attention across the country. One of President Trump's first acts upon returning to office was to restart family detention, where families are now being jailed together and parents are forced to make the most impossible of decisions: keep their children with them in prison or be separated. In the past, family detention was used to detain families who had recently crossed the border. That was cruel enough, and it inflicted lasting harms on children. But the Trump administration expanded family detention to detain families from the interior of the United States. And since then, ICE has jailed about 3,500 adults and children. That includes over 900 children who were jailed beyond the general 20-day limit that was set by a long-standing legal settlement that recognized that jails are never suitable for children. It is not just family detention. The administration has imposed draconian new policies on people wishing to sponsor and take custody of unaccompanied children. This has led to sponsors who are largely parents and family members of children being scared to come forward. As a result, families are separated and kids are forced to languish in the custody of the Office of Refugee Resettlement. The average length of stay in ORR custody last year was 117 days, nearly 4 months. That is 390% longer, almost 4 times the number in 2024. In immigration court, there are days specifically dedicated to what is called a kid's docket. I have been there to observe a kid's docket, sat through what I think is just absolutely shocking, and most Americans have no idea that this is happening. Children as young as 4 and 5 years old, by themselves, some clinging to stuffed animals, who are left to defend themselves in a language that they don't know, against a government adult attorney with years of training. And judges give these mostly unrepresented children an 18-minute crash course in immigration law, one of the most complicated areas of law in our legal system, second only to tax law. In a completely surreal scene, they tell these young kids that they have the right to present and cross-examine witnesses, that they can object to anything presented by an adult DHS attorney if they don't want it presented against them. It's hard enough for adults to represent themselves in immigration court, let alone a child. Needless to say, this is not a fair system. And these children, if they can't adequately represent themselves, which the majority cannot, they get sent back to their home countries, often to violence, persecution, and trafficking from which they were trying to flee. All of this leads to lasting trauma for all children, regardless of their immigration status or whether they have an immigrant parent or a family member, even those who are non-immigrant classmates and have to watch their friends disappear or lose a parent. Today, we will hear painful things, I know, from experts across the country who interact with these families and children, who represent them, as well as someone who is forced to live with that fear and anxiety every single day. I want to thank our witnesses for being here. I want to apologize to the people across the country who are going to hear terrible things that our government is doing to our children. And I want to thank our witnesses especially for telling your stories, because by doing so, you are shedding a light on the horrible situation that so many immigrant children, U.S. citizen children, and their families find themselves in as a result of the cruel policies of this Trump administration. And together, you are helping us to ensure that we demand real accountability for these horrors and for the trauma that we're inflicting on our children. With that, it's now my pleasure to introduce today's witnesses. Neha Desai is the Managing Director of Children's Human Rights and Dignity at the National Center for Youth Law, where she leads the organization's work on behalf of immigrant children. Ms. Desai received her law degree from Berkeley School of Law and her undergraduate degree from the University of Chicago. Marion, or Mickey Donovan Kalust, is the Director of Legal Services of Immigrant Defenders Law Center, Children's Representation Project. It's also called IMDEF. She has nearly 15 years of experience advocating for immigrant children and youth. She graduated from the UCLA School of Law with a specialization in public interest law and policy and earned her BA summa cum laude from Goucher College. Dr. Tanya Caballero is an assistant professor of pediatrics at Johns Hopkins Medicine and holds a master's degree in health sciences from the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. She has been a board-certified pediatrician for 12 years. She served as an executive committee member of the American Academy of Pediatrics Council on Immigrant Child and Family Health for 6 years, supporting clinical reports, policies, and strategies in the care of children in immigrant and refugee families. Nicole Izern has been an educator for 11 years, teaching first grade and third grade for 9 years. She is currently a community school liaison, working directly with families, providing wraparound services to meet their needs. Ms. Izern received her bachelor's degree in education at Penn State University and her master's degree in special education at Towson University. And for our last witness, I want to yield to Representative Bonamici from Oregon to introduce her constituent, Manny.
Thank you very much, Ranking Member Jayapal. It is my pleasure to introduce Manny as a witness for today's hearing. Manny is a courageous 17-year-old high school student from the district I represent in Northwest Oregon. Manny's been outspoken in the community about the fears he lives with every day because of the Trump administration's reckless and harmful immigration policies. In his free time, he likes to play soccer, tennis, and FIFA. So thank you, Manny, for being here and sharing your story. We're glad you're here today.
Thank you so much, Representative Bonamici. We welcome all of our distinguished witnesses here today, and we thank you for participating. We ask that you summarize your testimony in 4 minutes. And to help you stay within that time, there is a timer. Can you see the timer? Oh, okay, right here, timer, to help you keep track of time. Ms. Desai, we'll start with you.
Thank you so much, Representative Jayapal, for holding this important hearing today, and thank you for all the members of Congress present today. Over the past 20 years, I have watched children in federal immigration custody go from being a largely invisible population with few legal protections to being a highly visible, highly politicized population of children whose rights are being systematically dismantled. This is part of a calculated strategy largely outlined in Project 2025 to reverse decades of hard-fought protections for the most vulnerable children in this country. Today, I will tell you about 2 groups of children in federal immigration custody. Children that arrived without parents or legal guardians, known as unaccompanied children, and children that arrived with parents or legal guardians, known as accompanied children. For unaccompanied children, a bipartisan Congress designed protections with a simple principle in mind. Children should be released to their families swiftly and safely. This administration has made a mockery of that principle. Months ago, it instituted Operation Guardian Trace to target and deport the very families waiting to take these children home. As of November of 2025, nearly 3,000 parents and caregivers have been arrested as part of this operation. When families move forward to sponsor children out of custody, they face nonsensical, escalating hurdles that have nothing to do with children's safety. As a result, the average time in custody for unaccompanied children has skyrocketed from around 37 days to nearly 200 days. The impact on children trapped in detention is undeniable. A mother who is desperately trying to get her daughter out of detention told us, "Every time I talk to my daughter, she cries. She tells me she wants to die." Recently, a 3-year-old girl was detained alone for over 5 months, even though her father stepped forward a day after she was placed in custody to sponsor her. While she was in custody, she experienced severe abuse. Now let's talk about accompanied children detained with their parents. Since March of 2025, hundreds of families have been detained in a prison-like facility in Dilley, Texas. The government has taken the position that they can detain these children indefinitely. In December and January alone, nearly 600 children were detained for over 20 days. As we speak, there are 5-year-old precious twins that have been there for almost 300 days. The conditions recounted to us by families are abhorrent and unacceptable for anyone, let alone children. Lights on all night, every night. A mom goes to turn off the lights so her baby can sleep, and the guards come right back in and turn them on. The food is frequently inedible. Families have found worms and mold in their food. Children have vomited from the food. Many children have become listless from malnutrition. And when children get sick in these conditions, care is often delayed or denied entirely. A 9-year-old was denied his asthma inhaler until after he suffered 2 severe asthma attacks, and a 2-year-old endured high fever and diarrhea for 11 days before being transferred to a hospital for appropriate medical care. The psychological toll is devastating. Children hit themselves in the face or repeatedly throw themselves on the floor in desperation. Children who had been fully potty trained begin wetting themselves again. When a distraught 7-year-old was crying incessantly, he was given psychotropic medications which only worsened his symptoms. Teenagers describe intense depression, nightmares, panic attacks. At least 2 youth have tried to kill themselves. Beyond the deprivation, there is cruel control. Staff have searched rooms, confiscated children's drawings. When a detained mother who is a pastor tried to bring families together in prayer, the guards came and yelled at them and forbid them from praying. Staff routinely threatened to separate children from their parents to coerce compliance. Children report being mocked, yelled at, and treated as animals. Let's be clear. There is no humane way to detain families, and absolutely no legitimate reason to ever do so. Children are suffering tremendously in federal immigration custody right now. Thank you for caring about these children, and thank you for shining a spotlight on what this country is doing to them every day.
Thank you so much. And I want to point out that we have posters here that are letters that have been written from children in detention. Ms. Donovan-Kalust, recognized.
Thank you, Ranking Member Jayapal and members of Congress for being here and for convening this panel. How's that?
It's very, very strange, my setup.
Is this okay? Thank you. While it's not making the same headlines, families today are being torn apart just as they were under zero tolerance. Then, Stephen Miller orchestrated a plot to deter asylum seekers by literally snatching babies from parents' arms, sending the children to ORR custody and their parents to ICE prisons and deporting them. I spent those awful days comforting crying children and my nights trying to locate and contact their parents. Then, as now, the chaos and cruelty are the point. Then, as now, children in ORR custody are suffering. Since the beginning of this administration, ORR has discarded its child welfare mandate and turned itself instead into a tool of mass deportation. Children are being detained for months on end, often with no explanation, as their families comply with everything the government has asked of them to receive them. Our youngest client, only 3 years old, has been in custody for 250 days. Another client, a 5-year-old with an intellectual disability, has been detained for nearly 200 days, even though his U.S. citizen family member has done everything the government has asked to receive him. Many kids suffer from depression, anxiety, and PTSD due to the trauma of detention and family separation. They are missing out on the little things, goodnight kisses and bedtime stories, and the big things. 2 of our clients have been forced to grieve the death of a parent while alone in ORR custody. Increasingly, children are being forced to file habeas petitions in federal court just to be released from government custody as the law requires. In fact, in January, of the only 20 children ORR released to a parent, 10 of them were petitioners in IMDA-filed habeas cases. That should not be. The government is also using children as bait to detain and deport their families. When family members come forward to complete the reunification process, ORR has begun coordinating with DHS to detain them instead. Upon hearing of her mother's detention, one of our clients broke down and had to be hospitalized on a psych hold. The guilt she heaped on herself, the fear she felt for her mother, were overwhelming. We've seen the images of Liam and his bunny hat being used to lure his father into ICE's clutches. That same scenario is playing out over and over for children in ORR custody. And while the government unleashes this cruelty on children, it's no accident that it's also trying to take away their lawyers. In February and again in March 2025, it canceled all funding for legal representation for unaccompanied children. Imagine our 3-year-old client representing himself in immigration court. While restored temporarily through litigation, legal services are again threatened by an attempt to replace trained lawyers with video presentations. Meanwhile, the government fast-tracks kids' deportation, threatens them with thousands of dollars in fines, bribes them to return to their home countries, and literally pulls them out of their beds in the middle of the night on a holiday weekend to return them to Guatemala with no due process at all. If it's not painfully clear, these children need lawyers now more than ever. One of my clients is an 8-year-old who fled violence in his home country. He shared that when he was feeling sad about being separated from his mom, he liked to run to feel the wind in his face. We secured his release through a habeas after 8 months in custody. Without a lawyer, he would still be detained, still yearning for freedom and the wind in his face. Children aren't bait or political pawns. They're not invaders, as Stephen Miller would have you believe. They're children, and they deserve to be treated like children and afforded protection and safety, not detention and deportation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Ms. Caballero.
Good morning. My name is Dr. Tanya Caballero. I'm a board-certified pediatrician. I've been practicing in the Latino community for 12 years. I'm an assistant professor at Johns Hopkins, and I'm a member of the American Academy of Pediatrics, formerly of the Executive Committee on Academy's Council on Immigrant, Child, and Family Health. The views I'm expressing are my own and don't necessarily reflect those of Johns Hopkins University, the University of Medicine, or Academy of Pediatrics, and I appreciate you having me today. I'm deeply concerned about how children are being impacted by harmful immigration actions taking place in our country. From children who have a parent who is detained and those who are living in fear of family separation to those who are being held in detention themselves. As a pediatrician, I know this will have long-lasting effects on their health and well-being, which is why I'm here to speak today. In my work, I have cared for children who have had at least one parent who's been detained caregivers, and detaining caregivers and separating them from their children not only cause profound stress, it removes a child's primary source of safety and comfort. The experience of separation creates fear, anxiety, and stress. Prolonged exposure to stress increases the risk for what is called toxic stress. This occurs when the body's stress response is triggered frequently or intensely and for long periods of time without adequate support or coping, like in a family's environment or a caregiver. It can affect development, metabolic and immune function in a growing child, and can even lead to physical and mental health problems into adulthood, like heart disease, anxiety, depression, and substance use. Children whose parents have been detained experience a profound stress response that manifests as refusing to eat, difficulty sleeping and paying attention at school, difficulty regulating their emotions, and anxiety and depression. I've had several mothers tell me that since their husband's detainment, their children won't sleep alone. They follow their mothers around the house and beg them not to leave for fear that they too will disappear. I know of breastfeeding mothers who were detained and separated from their infants, causing them to lose breast milk and miss a critical developmental stage of bonding. We are also seeing increased depression and suicidal ideation from teens down to elementary school-age children who are harming themselves, terrified of being separated from their families. Pediatricians like me are also witnessing a chilling effect, where families avoid medical care and use of public services for which they qualify, and out of fear of potential family separation. Children are missing routine visits when they receive vaccines. They're missing care for diabetes or asthma and therapies and treatment for conditions like cerebral palsy or autism. When children miss out on this care, it can turn a routine pediatric issue into an emergency. Healthcare settings need to remain safe, protected spaces for us to care for all children. Lastly, we know there's no amount of time spent in ICE detention that is safe for a child. Detention has short and long-term consequences for a child's physical, mental, and emotional health. 911 recordings from the Dilley Family Detention Center have documented a series of alarming medical emergencies, including infants in respiratory distress and pregnant women having seizures. To date, independent medical experts have not been given access to family detention facilities to ensure children and families are safe. It is critical that independent medical experts, such as pediatricians, are allowed into these facilities. Immigrant families are threaded into the fabric of all of our communities. When we pull out threads, the fabric frays, and we weaken our whole community. Our federal leaders must advance immigration policies that prioritize the health and well-being of all children, not just the ones that are causing damage. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Caballero. Ms. Isern.
Good morning, Ranking Member Jayapal and members of Congress. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I'm here to speak on behalf of immigrant children and families. I'm sorry, this is really hard. We're being disparaged, mistreated, tormented, and physically and psychologically abused under the hands of this administration. Over the last 14 months, our students have been traumatized time and time again by ICE's unlawful and intimidative tactics on their way to school in the mornings. After countless violent abductions in and around our school neighborhoods, families are living under constant fear. Students are afraid to leave their home, afraid to go to the park, to even open the blinds. Parents fear accessing local resources that are meant to support them. Seeking help and even medical care for their children has become a risk. Families cannot safely cross the DC border to take their children to Children's Hospital for specialized care. Instead, we're forced to send school social workers to accompany them so their parents can remain hidden and safe. When was the last time any of you sent your child to a pre-surgical appointment without you, accompanied only by a school employee? That is not a solution. We have seen ICE agents use elementary school parking lots as staging grounds. Places meant for morning drop-off have turned into sites of surveillance and intimidation. School parking lots should not be law enforcement bases or immigration checkpoints. We're talking about young children in pigtails walking to school, witnessing their neighbors getting aggressively taken, fear enveloping their whole little selves as they sit by the window on the bus, only to see hardworking neighbor put in handcuffs while his wife screams in desperation. During a private listening session this year, many parents reported to me that their children were crying themselves to sleep, only to dive into nightmares, causing restless nights. Their children's anxiety levels are rising, crying in panic as their parent leaves for work, unsure if they will return that evening. One 17-year-old was recently admitted to a psychiatric facility, and a 5-year-old expressed his suicide plan immediately following both of their mother's detainments. Instead of messaging their friends, teens are messaging the lawyer, discussing legal contracts. Teens are putting college on hold and putting all of their savings into exorbitantly high $20,000 bonds. They're taking on jobs to avoid eviction. One mom had told me had told her 4 kids that Christmas was canceled this year due to all of their funds going towards legal fees to get their father out of detention. The community came through for them with presents. As I dropped them off on Christmas Eve, their mother cried in my arms as she explained that her children were asking her if their father was a criminal. He's not. But they were confused as this country's government has imprisoned him in a jail, shackled and mistreated for 3 months. Why are we allowing ICE agents to terrorize our neighbors and traumatize our children? Why are we watching as laws are broken in broad daylight? Our students carry this irreversible trauma into our classroom. We say we want schools where children thrive, where they read on grade level and excel in math. How? In what world does that happen when children are grieving the sudden disappearance of a parent? It's disheartening that our president is the one causing all of this harm. Thank you, representatives, for hearing me out. Our students and their experiences matter.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Earn. Manny.
Chairwoman Jayapal and members of this committee, I want to thank you for allowing me to speak today and holding this hearing. My name is Manny. I'm 17 years old and I'm from Hillsboro, Oregon. I also am a U.S. citizen, but even though I was born here, I still live in fear every day. This fear became real for me last October when my friend's father was arrested by ICE while he was on his way to work. He was on his way to work to bring the daily bread for his family. The people who took him were masked They didn't identify themselves. One moment he was there, the next he was gone. My friend's father has been in custody for ICE for months, leaving his family without a primary provider and facing several emotional and financial hardship. The unnecessarity of this situation has deeply affected not only his family but our entire community. Despite efforts to support them, my friend now lives in constant fear and sadness, and many of us share that same anxiety, even as U.S. citizens. Since then, everything has changed. I'm scared when my parents leave the house in the morning for work. I don't know if I'll be able to see them again or if I'll be able to hug them again. That's not how a kid should live. My fellow classmates and I can't focus in school the way we used to. I try, but it's hard to think about homework or tests when I'm worried about my family and my friends. I should be planning my future, but instead I'm obsessing about whether the people I love are safe. I'm even scared to go to school. I worry that strangers in a mask could show up looking for my teachers, my friends, or even me. I worry about my community, if our parents will be there waiting for us when we get home from school. Even though I'm a U.S. citizen, I still feel like I could get taken or hurt. We've seen that being a U.S. citizen doesn't protect you from the masked men. We all saw how 2 Americans were murdered in broad daylight. My mom is worried that I'm living in constant fear of losing people around me. And she's right, I do. But it's because I see it in my community every single day. Families are suffering, people are struggling just to get by. I try to help where I can, connecting people with fair food, to support, to anything that makes life living a little easier. But I was 16. My friends and I shouldn't have to carry this. We should be thinking about things like football games, prom, or our college plans. Where I live, our community is 25% Latino. But lately, a lot of us feel like we're being judged by how we look or how we speak. We feel like we're being treated differently, like we don't belong, even though we do. Even though there's a constitution designed to protect our rights, we feel like those rights are constantly in question, like we can't count on them to protect us. At 16 years old, I never thought I would ever need to attend my local city council meeting, but I summoned the courage with God's and my family's help to share the pain we're all feeling in my community, and to fight for our rights. Today, I'm 17 years old, and never would I have imagined being in the most powerful building in the country to share the pain that my town is experiencing, and to plead for your help. I'm here to tell you that I'm tired of being scared. I'm tired of seeing videos of people getting taken. I'm tired of worrying if my friends are going to lose their parents. I'm tired of feeling like no one's listening. I shouldn't be living like this. No kid should. I'm here today because I want something to change. I want you to hear me, and I want you to hear all of us. Please do something so kids like me don't have to be afraid every day. Please make sure people are treated with dignity and no one is taken without clear identification and accessibility. Please push for reforms that would fix these stupid, outdated immigration policies and to ensure that hardworking families who just want a better life for themselves and for their communities they love, like mine, so that they can pursue the American dream. I just want to feel safe. I want my family to feel safe, and I want my community to feel safe. We just want to live the American dream and not an American nightmare. Thank you.
Manny, that was so powerful. Thank you so much for speaking out. We're going to move to member questions. And I'm going to ask members to, there's a timer here. We're going to keep it to 4 minutes because we do have a number of members that are going to be cycling through, and we want to make sure we can get everybody in before we get to votes. And we're going to start by, I'm going to reserve my questions until the end. We're going to start with Mr. Chuy Garcia, Representative Garcia from Illinois.
Ranking Member, for holding this shadow hearing to shine a spotlight on the administration's brutality against immigrant children. This issue is personal for me as well. I was an immigrant child myself, learning how to navigate a new country, and depending on the grace and kindness of relatives and, of course, complete strangers toward my family and myself. I know how difficult it is to adjust to a new life as a child, and I cannot imagine the level of trauma that our government is inflicting on immigrant children today. In the Chicagoland region alone, ICE and CBP agents have pepper sprayed a 1-year-old child, zip-tied children after landing military helicopters in the middle of the night on the roof of their family's apartment building, and traumatized little kids at daycare centers whose teacher was abducted. And two of my constituents, a mother and a 13-year-old son, were detained after a routine check-in appointment and held at the notorious facility in Dilley, Texas, along with hundreds of immigrant children. They were held there for over 3 months as their physical and mental health deteriorated, and they were denied access to medical care and medication. They were just released yesterday, as a matter of fact, but it was unconscionable that they were held for so long, and there are still hundreds of children still languishing at Dilley, and that's why we're here today. There's nothing that justifies treating children like this. It takes a special brand of a sociopath to brutalize kids, and this administration is filled with such people, and we must vigorously oppose their cruelty. Thank you to all the witnesses for being here today. Ms. Donovan Cullis, have you seen this issue with your clients where people are showing up to immigration court and routine check-ins and being detained along with their kids?
We have, and in the ORR context, how we're seeing it is that parents are being asked to show up to appointments to complete parts of the sponsorship process, and instead ORR is coordinating with DHS to have DHS be present to detain and deport the parent. It recently happened for a loving father who actually had received his child from ORR custody, had a pending application for legal status, and then DHS followed up saying, oh, there was one step that was missing from the ORR process. We need to meet with you now. He complied, and the next thing his family knew of him, he was in his home country.
Thank you. And Dr. Caballero, you've spoken about the health impact of immigration enforcement on children. When we see the reports of the horrific conditions at detention facilities like Dilley, is there a high risk that the trauma these children face will cause long-term damage to their physical and mental health?
Well, when we talk about stress, being in a facility like that is a prolonged period of high stress in a child. And we know that when children experience stress and they're out of their environments, they're not sleeping in their beds, they're not getting adequate nutrition, that affects their health and development. When they come out, if they're able to come out of that detention facility, what they really need is a caregiver, a warm, caring environment, and a stable place to live and recover. If they don't have those things, if they aren't able to go back to a safe environment, that can significantly affect their health and increase their risk for toxic stress in the future.
Thank you very much. And lastly, Manny, thank you for being here. It takes a lot of courage to do this, and we're trying to stop the traumatization of families and especially children all over the country. Thank you, Ranking Member.
Thank you so much, Mr. Garcia. Next, I'd like to recognize Representative Bonamici from Oregon.
Thank you, Ranking Member Jayapal, and thank you to all the witnesses. I tell you, as a mom and a grandma, it is gut-wrenching to listen to the stories here, and I wish everybody in this country could hear what you have to say today. Because these policies have wide-ranging consequences. They're affecting families and children and educators and caretakers. I just had someone who runs a child care center in my district say that one of her staff thought it would be safer to have her baby in her kitchen than go to the hospital. That's completely unacceptable. And we've seen in Oregon, ICE has arrested parents with young children in the car, surrounded teenagers at gunpoint. And last year, a 10-year-old from Hillsborough, where Manny's from, gave me a note, a handwritten note saying she's so afraid for her friends at school. She can't concentrate. She's afraid that they're going to come into the school and take her friends. Manny, thank you for bravely speaking out at the City Council and now in Congress. You do belong. You absolutely do belong. And I know you've been doing so much to help people in your community. That's really, really amazing. Dr. Caballero, I know from the very first Trump administration and speaking with pediatricians how this trauma is affecting children. And thank you for recognizing that there's no time or place ever for a child to be held in detention. But unfortunately, the Trump administration doesn't seem to care. They've detained parents of more than 11,000 U.S. citizens, which is outrageous. For weeks, I've been fighting for the release of Maria, an Oregon mom who's worked, paid her taxes, done everything right. She doesn't have a traffic ticket, and she's sitting in a prison-like detention center while her husband had surgery. Her kids are traumatized. They're trying to focus on supporting the family. It's really outrageous, and needless to say, her kids are struggling in her absence. Last week, I had a roundtable conversation about the effects of immigration enforcement in schools, and definitely affecting student learning, because students should feel safe. Children can't learn when they're living with this fear. As Manny said, we need every member of Congress to understand our responsibility, and we need to close Dilley. There's no reason why we need to have a jail for children. And I want to ask you, Manny, I know that you shared your personal story, but I know there's a lot of people in your community who feel the same. So I know it's not just you. So if you want to talk a little bit about what you're doing to support each other, do you feel like you have support at your school and in your community? And do you see any hope for the future?
Well, like what we do in my community, I feel like there is a lot of support because, a lot of people, when I, help make the walkout happen for my school, a lot of people, like parents and stuff, came out and they gave like food to the kid, like all the kids. They brought pizza, drinks, and stuff like that for all the kids that were walking. And I thought that was good because, like, I didn't ask, or no one really asked for a lot of that. A lot of parents just came and did it just because they wanted to. And I mean, I do see change in the future if more kids will come up and talk like I did, because they're going to be the ones that are going to be running the future. They're going to be the adults in the future, so they need to speak up more.
Appreciate that. In the remaining few seconds, Dr. Caballero, is there any way to reverse, or is this going to be the trauma, or is it going to be really generational?
One really most important way to prevent toxic stress is for kids to have a stable caregiver in their life and to grow up in a stable environment. Toxic stress is not permanent. It can be reversible, but we really need to make sure that these kids are living and returning to families and safe environments where they can thrive and heal.
Hope that's soon. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you so much, Representative Bonamici. I now recognize Representative Chu from California.
Thank you. Adelanto is a notorious detention center close to my district in Southern California, and it has a long, horrifying track record of abuse and neglect, where at least 13 people have died, which is why I have demanded its closure for more than 10 years. But under Donald Trump, during the second term, 5 of those died prematurely, and 3 of them were fathers who left behind devastated, traumatized children. They were men like Alberto Gutierrez, who became critically ill in custody and was denied basic medication for conditions like diabetes and high cholesterol, despite repeated pleas for help. By the time his son was finally able to visit him, health had visibly deteriorated. His skin and his eyes had turned yellow, and staff still failed to intervene until it was too late. He was just 48 years old. Gabriel Garcia Aviles was a father and grandfather who called this country home for over 30 years. After becoming seriously ill at Adelanto, his family struggled to get even basic information about his conditions or whereabouts, only to receive a call telling them to come say their final goodbye. He was 56 years old. As the family visited his bloody, bruised, and intubated body, the hospital claimed that he had been undergoing alcohol withdrawal, which the family contests to this day. And this month, Irvin Cruz Nape was wrongly detained and taken to Adelanto because of the color of his skin. While in custody, he repeatedly reported chest pains and symptoms consistent with a heart attack, but was denied care. He died just days after being released. This is care that could have saved his life, but he was only 44 years old. 3 fathers, all denied care and dignity, are now dead at the hands of Donald Trump's vile immigration policies. These men endured unspeakable, dehumanizing treatment, and their families had to bear witness. And now their children are left devastated and traumatized without their fathers. So, Dr. Caballero and Ms. Isern, can you speak to the impact that losing a loved one in detention, especially under such preventable and dehumanizing conditions, what the effect that has on children and their long-term well-being?
A lot. Yeah, these kids are not okay. They're obviously not focused in the classroom. They're crying. Some of them are crying in class, and that's also causing fear for other students. They're just living in fear. It's unimaginable what they're going through. If I'm feeling this way, I keep thinking, what could you guys possibly be feeling? But yeah, it was really hard for them. Lots of depression, lots of sadness within the family. For example, there's also a parent that was deported, and mom is in fear that one of her 4 children has autism, Down syndrome. He's had 3 open heart surgeries. He gets fed by a feeding tube. And he would not have that medical care in his parents' country, even though all of his siblings were born here. And they're terrified to even go to the bus stop for his special ed bus. So it's unimaginable and really painful.
Thank you so much, Representative Chu. I now recognize Representative Menifee from Texas.
Thank you, Ranking Member. I'm Christian Menifee, newly elected. I represent most of Houston, which is home to one of the largest immigrant populations in the entire country. These are folks who are our neighbors. They own businesses on our blocks. They do the jobs that keep our city running, and for many of us, they're our family. A recent report showed that as many as 70,000 immigrant children in the Houston area are at risk of deportation under President Trump's new draconian approach. These are kids who, in many instances, didn't ask to be brought here. They didn't get to choose where they're born, and now the United States government is directly targeting them and punishing them for it. I'm outraged after hearing some of the stories here today. Americans are outraged. Houstonians are absolutely outraged. When I see ICE targeting children and using human beings as bait to carry out this senseless mass deportation campaign, I'm outraged as a member of Congress, but more than that, I'm outraged as a father. My youngest son just turned 2 earlier this week, and when I look at pictures of children who can barely even string sentences together because they're so young, yet they're sitting in detention. I know, like so many other folks, I feel absolutely sick. I can't imagine seeing my kid in a jail cell just because of where he was born, just because of what language he speaks at home, or just because I was trying to protect my family. No parent should ever have to imagine that, and no child should ever have to live through it. I saw firsthand what policies in Houston, like family separation, do to people. What many of you remember as kids in cages. Those policies don't just harm the children trapped in them, they harm the soul of our country. I represent a border state, and I've said it over and over. Immigration must be fixed with compassion and common sense. This month, I visited an ICE facility, a detention center in my district, and it confirmed what we all already knew. The president told people that he was going to be going after the most violent criminals, but instead, nearly half of the people in that detention center are not there because of a criminal referral or because of a crime that they committed. They're simply because they're undocumented. Any policy failure that locks up children at no fault of their own, regardless of their race, their faith, where they come from, is a moral failure. And I want to be clear, that moral failure belongs to President Trump. Ms. Donovan Calous, I wanted to ask you, I've seen videos of small children appearing before an immigration judges alone, not speaking English and with no lawyer. I'm an attorney, but this is not my practice, so can you kind of break down to folks how is that even legal and how is that happening in this country in 2026?
Thank you for the question, Congressman Menifee. And can you hear me all right? Is my
Yep.
mic okay? So how is it even legal? It shouldn't be. Children should not be forced to represent themselves in immigration court, but that is exactly what's happening. There's no lower age limit. We've had children, babies, toddlers, sitting on a social worker's lap or a volunteer's lap in court because they had no one there to represent them. It's unconscionable. It's not in their language, but more than that, even if it is translated into their language, there's no chance that they understand what's going on. As a children's immigration lawyer, I spend a lot of time working with children, helping them understand what's going on. And even I, one time, spent a long time with a 13-year-old girl, helping her understand what would happen next in the process. And then I said, "And what questions do you have for me?" And she said, "What is a judge?" They're children. Of course they don't know. And so, that is why there's been bipartisan agreement for 20 years that there should be funding for legal representation for unaccompanied children. And that's why it's so unconscionable that this administration is trying to rip that away.
Thank you. Thank you, Ranking Member. Yield back.
Thank you so much, Representative Menifee. Let me now recognize Representative Dexter from Oregon.
Thank you, Ranking Member Jayapal, for your leadership and for convening us today. And thank you to our witnesses for so compellingly sharing what's really happening and your stories. Manny, thank you from my heart and for Oregon's children for showing the courage that you have and the representation. You do give me hope, and thank you, and just sincere gratitude. No child should be imprisoned. Detention of children should just and must be illegal. Dr. Caballero, as a fellow physician and as a mother, I'm deeply grateful for your work and for your care for our children. My team has been working with a group of pediatricians to get them access to the Dilley, Texas facility. We have not been successful thus far. I hope we can work together to make that happen imminently, and I look forward to us actually speaking with families and children to document for the world what is happening personally. My constituent, 7-year-old Diana Crespo-Gonzalez, was detained with her family outside an Oregon hospital when she was sick, so sick that her parents took the risk of taking her to a doctor, and they were detained by ICE in front of the hospital. And they refused. They knew they were being taken, and they pleaded to just let her see a doctor before they took them. They were denied. Diana received no meaningful medical evaluation, no appropriate treatment, unclean water that worsened her condition, and inadequate nutrition. I wanted to go into this more, but I'm looking at the clock, so I'm going to go to a question that has not been covered because the medical conditions in that facility, we know children are suffering. We know they have generational trauma. I'm going to go to a question, Ms. Desai, that I hope you can help us document, because I do believe I was able to help release Diana because she had exceeded 20 days in custody. Do you believe Dilley can come into compliance with the Flores Agreement settlement? And what must be done to ensure children and families are no longer subjected to medical neglect? And sorry, this is for Ms. Desai.
Your question, Representative Dexter, and I have to start by thanking you for your incredible advocacy. I remember that day well, and it was an honor to get to work with you. So thank you, first of all. So it is important to understand that this administration is taking the position that they don't need to comply with Flores. They believe that the, quote, One Big Beautiful Bill Act, unquote, enables them to indefinitely detain children. They are wrong. They have taken this position in district court and now up on appeal in their effort to terminate the Flores settlement agreement entirely. There was an incredible amicus brief submitted by 26 senators that articulated why they are wrong and why the government is still required to comply with Flores. It is absolutely the case that detaining children when they are not, when removal is not imminent, is a violation of the Flores settlement agreement. The concept that children need to be in licensed placements is a core part of the settlement, and that is what led to a decision a number of years ago around a benchmark of 20 days for an unlicensed facility, which is what Dilley is. Unfortunately, it's not a bright line rule. However, the government is violating Flores in many different ways, and we submitted a filing last Friday that articulated multiple different ways in which the government is continuing to violate the settlement. But again, at this point, the government's position is that they are not required to release children within a certain period of time.
Thank you. And I see my time has expired. I do want to state that there is a concern that if we end child detention, that we will increase family separation. And I just implore my colleagues to have this very serious conversation, because we have to do something, and continuing to just talk about it is not enough. We need to do something actively. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you so much, Representative Dexter. Staying in Oregon, we're going to go to Representative Salinas.
Thank you so much, Ranking Member Jayapal, and thank you to all of the witnesses, and especially to you, Manny. You did an incredible job today. Over the past year, we've watched as this Trump administration has terrorized our communities, and mine in the Willamette Valley, including, Washington County. It's one of the hardest hit areas in our state. Violated our Constitution, spread fear, and is sowing constant stress for our children. On the campaign trail, Trump told Americans that he was going to go after the worst of the worst. He lied. He's not targeting criminals and gang members. He's targeting innocent families, including children, in my district and in Oregon. In July, ICE agents stopped Mahdi, who was driving to drop off his child at daycare in Beaverton, very close to Hillsborough. ICE agents pulled him over and asked for his identification. His child recognized what was happening and yelled, "Daddy, police." This is a daycare-age child. Mahdi pleaded with the ICE agent, saying, "There's a baby in the car." He asked to at least drop off his child first. The officers followed Mahdi to the daycare. They let him drop off his child. But immediately afterward, in the daycare parking lot, the ICE agents unnecessarily broke Mahdi's window and detained him for all the school children and the parents to witness. And then this past November, in my district, so similar to your story, Manny, ICE agents detained Christian Jimenez in McMinnville. Christian is a 17-year-old high school student. He was on his lunch break. ICE agents approached him. Christian told the agents, "I'm a U.S. citizen." They said, "I don't care." This is the theme of this administration. They don't care. The agents shattered Christian's window and got glass in Christian's eye. They detained him, took him to an ICE facility, and kept him there for hours before he was released. And to this day, Christian will not speak to anybody. I have let him know that my office is open. I am open to him. He will not talk to anyone. He is traumatized and he is fearful for his family. The priority here is not to keep U.S. citizens safe. It's to attack and traumatize our communities. We are a nation that believes in due process. We protect children, not traumatize them, and we don't turn our backs on families because of where they come from, what they look like, or how they speak. This administration has forgotten that, and it is our responsibility to remind them. That is what we're doing today, to hold them accountable. We measure ourselves not by how we treat the powerful, but how we treat the most vulnerable, and right now, Trump is failing. But I have a question for you, Ms. Caballero and Ms. Isern. I held a roundtable with young, very high-achieving Latino children from teenage years to their early 20s, asking them some of the things that they need as a first-generation student, college graduate student myself, and they were giving me structural issues around Department of Education. And then finally, towards the end of the meeting, it became clear that they are all protecting their families. They are actually serving as almost the primary caregivers. Besides bringing in dollars, they're dropping off their younger siblings at school. They're bringing food into the house. They're going grocery shopping. They're providing any of the external things that the family needs. That alone, that's when the tears started shedding. There's a lot of stress on these kids. What else can Congress be doing to help them? I stood up a universal representation program in Oregon before I left the state legislature. I would love to see, because we know that when families and kids have attorneys, they have better success rates when they're in the immigration system. But what more can we be doing for these kids at home who have this additional stress, like Manny, who is fearful for his family?
Yeah, we too have a student, a 19-year-old child who is now the sole provider for his 14-year-old, 8-year-old, and 3-year-old siblings. His mom was first detained and now deported. How to help them? I don't know. This needs to stop. Like, I don't know how he has so much power and nobody can fix that and stop this. It's all of these occurring in our neighborhoods have been no warrants, like you said, breaking windows. They're unacceptable, and this just shouldn't be happening. But we can't fund ICE. Like, we need to continue. We can't give in to whatever pressures they're putting onto us right now. We can't keep giving them all this money. I did not pay taxes to put my neighbors. 70% of them have no criminal record in detention centers.
Thank you so much, Representative Salinas.
I yield back. Thank you.
Let me now go to somebody who's been a real champion at getting kids released from Dilley, Representative Castro from Texas.
Thank you all. Thank you, Representative Jayapal, for convening us, and thank each of you for your testimony today. And also, thank you for the victims and community members who've spoken out. Thank you, Manny, for your courage to be here today and share your story. And to the doctors, to the lawyers, to the mental health professionals, to the advocates, and to the American people who have spoken out so strongly against the brutality not only on the streets that ICE is committing, but the brutality that most people don't get to see behind the closed walls of places like Dilley and Stipsy and Carnes, where I've been, and we'll go in April to San Benito, where the teenage pregnant girls are kept. There's so many brutal ironies on this issue. We talk about the legal aspect. Those kids sitting there, as Christian mentioned earlier, with no representation, even though there's so much at stake in their life. They have less legal rights in our system than a convicted serial killer. They literally have less legal rights than a convicted serial killer. We have also commodified child suffering and imprisonment in our nation. Some of the largest asset managers, companies in this country, own stakes in private detention companies, CoreCivic that runs Dilley. We've literally turned that into a commodity for investment. And there are so many cases that my office is working on, and I know other members of Congress continue to work on these cases, and we'll continue to go and inspect these prisons. But I'm also thinking ahead to how we change this and make sure that this nightmare doesn't happen again. And so I wanted to ask the lawyers, if y'all were keeping track of all the different legal violations by ICE. Yesterday, for example, it was reported that ICE admitted that they didn't have the authority to be arresting people in hallways, for example, and outside of courtrooms and so forth, because I believe that there ought to be a special commission if Democrats take over the House of Representatives or the Senate. There should be a special commission that investigates ICE's legal violations and human rights violations.
Thank you so much for that question, Representative Castro. And more than that, thank you so much for the extraordinary advocacy you have done on behalf of children at Dilley. It has not gone unnoticed by our entire field, and we are tremendously grateful to you.
Thank you.
That is an incredible idea of holding a forum in the future where we can really showcase all of the many ways in which ICE has violated children's rights. We are certainly tracking those in the context of the work that I do. Children who are in ICE custody are the children at Dilley, and so we have hundreds of declarations that memorialize the many different violations. We have many pleadings that we have, or court filings that memorialize this. I don't think it would be difficult to put this all together and put it on a spotlight to hold ICE accountable in the future. And I'll certainly keep that in mind moving forward so we can make sure that we build the record.
Thank you. And then the last part, where some of these violations have been brazen. And have you all seen motions for sanctions against attorneys and against ICE been filed in court? If there is malicious conduct or there's knowing illegal action, I hope that those issues will be taken up court by court and that there will be motion for sanctions against folks.
Have started to see that. It's the courts right now are the last line of defense for people whose rights have been trampled, whose constitutional rights have been violated. And so, again, this is another reason why children's access to counsel is so important right now, because somebody has to hold the government accountable, and the only way to do that right now is the court system, and hopefully actions that this body can take.
Thank you. Now you're back.
Thank you so much, Representative Castro. I now recognize Representative Ivey from Maryland.
Thank you, and Ms. Jayapal, I want to commend you for not just this hearing, but the series of hearings that you put together and your outstanding advocacy on this issue here and across the country. I want to thank all of you all for coming in today. Ms. Heiser, are those your kids behind you? Okay, well, that's how kids are supposed to look. They're happy bouncing around, but still well controlled. So, but I want to commend you or whoever is deserving of that. I did want to follow up on the questions that we were just discussing. Prince George's County is my congressional district. It's the eastern border of Washington, D.C. It's my school district is about 40% Latino now, so we have a lot of people in the ICE issue on that front, but we also have a large African diaspora immigrant population as well, and they're getting caught up in this too. But I was kind of curious because I've seen the trauma that kids go through with this kind of thing, and it's not clear to me though what happens afterwards. So I know we do a lot of work to get them out of detention, but are you aware are there systems in place or mental health assistance or programs in place to help them after they get out of that to figure out how to manage that trauma and address it?
No.
No. Okay.
Yeah, we've had two students, or in my 11 years as an educator, we've had two students, and they're not okay. They keep a lot in. One of them in first grade, he would not leave his backpack. He went everywhere for the first 2 weeks with his backpack. He would not let his things go. The following years, he really wasn't okay. And in that whole time, there was no system, there was no therapy, and he really needs that probably still. I don't know.
And I guess the best shot at doing that would be the state and localities perhaps providing that kind of assistance, because we're not going to be able to get it out of the federal government until there's a change in the administration. Are any of you aware of any kind of programs, maybe through school systems, that do any type of work with this? What would be best practices here?
Yeah, well, the school I work at now has a Linkages to Learning program that offers therapy, but that school that I was working at the time did not really have enough spaces in a different program that they kind of had. Having a linkages to learning therapy program, or I know there's other types of programs, they really should be at almost every school in our counties.
Yes, ma'am.
I would also say, too, it's really important to consider the fact that many of these children may or may not be eligible for insurance, health insurance. And so if you want to have licensed clinicians, therapists, you really need to have mechanisms for these kids to get the same amount of care that any other child would have access to, and in the language of their preference. So if we're talking about kids they themselves speak a language other than English, or their parents do, it's really important to have language concordant care or interpreters available, and a budget, and be able to compensate people for doing excellent work, because this is it's a long process.
Absolutely. And I guess to the extent you want to have the same therapist over time if possible. Once they develop a trusting relationship. Wow, I'm to 20 seconds already. I was going to quickly ask about the court issue. Someone just mentioned a moment ago that there is a growing effort, I guess, to have accountability within the courts, possibly through sanctions, I think the congressman raised. Is that in immigration courts, or are they going to Article I courts, if you know?
Oh, so many immigration cases are ending up in Article I courts right now because immigration judges have been instructed to ignore the law and deem people subject to mandatory detention that are not subject to mandatory detention under the law, meaning that they can never get out of ICE prison. And so more and more attorneys are taking cases to district courts on habeas petitions to get people out of detention as the law states they should be allowed to get out of detention. And in those cases, we're beginning to see motions for sanctions and judges taking real notice of the fact that the government attorneys going into those courtrooms are often lying, ignoring court orders, providing falsehoods to the court over and over and over again. And so that's the context in which we're beginning to see that. And in immigration court, it's been said that immigration court is traffic court with death penalty consequences. And so it's a real Wild West that the Department of Justice can simply tell an immigration judge to ignore the law, and that's what's happening right now.
Thank you so much. I apologize for running over, but thank you so much for the work that you're doing, and Manny, we're with you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ivey. Now I'd like to recognize Representative Ross from North Carolina.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I want to just echo my appreciation for all of the shadow hearings that you're doing and reiterate the fact that the entire Judiciary Committee should be hearing this information, taking it seriously, and conducting true oversight of the Trump administration. I also want to commend you. You've been working on this since the first Trump administration, and when I first joined the subcommittee, we visited the border, we visited children in detention centers, and this is a very, very serious issue. ICE and CBP have been all over North Carolina. They have picked people up. They are being sued. I had a constituent in my district who actually came here as an unaccompanied minor, ended up getting caught up in the system. We finally got her out of detention, but largely because she had a great attorney, and a friend of the family went very, very public in the media. But not every child is going to have an attorney. Not every child is going to have a U.S. citizen advocate who will embarrass this administration. And so while I'm tremendously grateful that she is now out, it should have never happened in the first place. So, Ms. Donovan-Caluste, I'd like to just get kind of to the nub of how this is happening and what the public is not seeing. So last year we began hearing reports of ICE agents showing up at the houses of sponsors of unaccompanied children to perform what they called a wellness check. What was the actual purpose of these checks?
Well, ICE is not a child welfare agency. ICE is a detention and removal agency, and So the purpose was not child welfare. It was very clearly surveillance and intimidation of immigrant families.
And have you had any clients experience this, and what happened?
Yes, we have. Primarily, the agents are from Homeland Security Investigations, which is a subset of DHS whose mandate is to investigate crimes by DHS and arms trafficking, not child welfare. So first, I'd like to say that means that those crimes are going uninvestigated so that HSI agents can intimidate immigrant families. And
Go ahead.
And secondly, we have had sponsors detained as a result of those quote-unquote wellness checks. So the opposite of child welfare is happening at those wellness checks.
And can you tell us a little bit about those sponsors? Because all we hear in the Judiciary Committee is how these sponsors are sex traffickers and different. So tell us what a sponsor of these children, what they have to go through procedurally to become a sponsor.
Thank you for that question, because the word sponsor can obscure the fact that the vast majority of these people are close family relatives, parents, adult siblings, grandparents, and they go through a litany of steps to ensure that their identity and that their identity is confirmed, and that there's no concerns that they wouldn't be able to take good care of the child. What's happening now is the government is adding layer and layer and layer and layer of additional requirements that have nothing to do with child welfare and are resulting in children now being detained indefinitely. Over 200 days currently is the average.
And I know I only have a few minutes left, but back to Mr. Ivy's question. So these are children who came here under difficult circumstances, finally get settled, and then are ripped away from that situation. What have you seen your clients go through?
It's horrific what our clients are going through right now, the trauma, the PTSD. Children are not supposed to grow up in detention, and that's what's happening right now. We have a 3-year-old client who's been there for 8 months. So that means that he started as a baby, he's turned 3 in detention, and there's no end in sight. This is not the experiences that 3-year-old children should be having.
Well, thank you for all you do, and I yield back.
Thank you, Representative Ross. I'd now like to recognize somebody who's been at the center of this in her state, Representative Morrison from Minnesota.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, for holding this hearing, and thank you to all of you for being here to share your experiences as well. Having cared for patients as an OBGYN for more than 20 years and a mother of 3 children who I adore, I'm beyond repulsed by what the Trump administration is doing to families across our country. Entities within and contracting with DHS are receiving billions of taxpayer dollars to detain human beings in appalling conditions that violate constitutionally protected rights and basic humanitarian standards. Taxpayer dollars that came from Republicans slashing health coverage and SNAP benefits for the most vulnerable Americans. Taxpayer dollars that could and should have gone to helping Americans afford health care, child care, groceries, and gas. Instead, they've gone to entities with abysmal levels of organization and accountability that have repeatedly failed to uphold the standards of facilities that hold tried and convicted criminals. The policies of this administration are harming our children, our communities, our schools, our businesses, our health, and our future. They are not making our communities safer or life more affordable. In Minnesota, pregnant women have avoided essential prenatal and postpartum care, fearing for their safety, their family, and their children. They've delayed ultrasounds, visits to address concerns for decreased fetal movement, treatable prenatal and postpartum infections. And in some truly alarming cases, women are laboring at home in conditions that called for medical observation. Providers and care team staff are also struggling with fear for their own safety, for their patients, and for the dangerous outcomes they know to be associated with hazardous delays in care. During pregnancy, heightened stress leads to preventable complications, escalations of manageable conditions into life-threatening emergencies, and long-term mental and physical impacts on mother and baby. No mother should be forced to make the choice between safety and care in the United States. I represent Minnesotans from the 3rd Congressional District that have stood fiercely and unapologetically on the side of the humanity and dignity of their neighbors. They have demanded an end to the horrific treatment of women, children, families, every human being this administration has terrorized without cause. The damage to mental and physical health these detention facilities inflict daily, and what the lawless surge of federal agents in Minnesota caused to the community I represent, is at a scale difficult to process, even with my 2 decades of experience working with patients in complex and precarious circumstances. Taxpayer dollars should be used to make life better and more affordable for Americans, not for creating mass detention centers to house tens of thousands of people and violate human rights. The only thing that outweighs how wasteful these policies and operations are is the shame and moral bankruptcy they reflect on our nation's soul. I'm horrified by the cruelty, inhumanity, and inadequate care I've seen at the ICE facilities I've conducted oversight of. The people receiving billions of dollars to run these facilities can't answer very basic questions about their operations. They have been inconsistent in confirming if they are adhering to a directive meant to protect against the unnecessary detention of pregnant women. They reject any meaningful oversight. They insist they are upholding standards they failed to provide actual evidence of following. In many facilities, they've had to be specifically compelled by court order to provide things like food, blankets, and water. We cannot allow the Trump administration to keep expanding these unaccountable, expensive, inhumane operations in our country. Cruel indifference to constitutional rights and human dignity cannot continue to be funded by taxpayer money taken from funding health care and food access. We have a responsibility to keep fighting for an end to this cruelty and threat to the health of our children and communities. The United States can and must do better than this. I see that my time's expired, but I'm hoping I can ask Dr. Caballero one quick question. Have you had patients who are too afraid to seek medical care? And can you just briefly talk about what kinds of long-term health impacts people can experience from delaying medical care?
Thank you so much for your question, Representative. Patients tell me that they make everyday choices about whether to leave their house, and every day is a risk. They take a risk. So some families decide that they are going to take their risk and take their kid into a facility, my clinic, and other times they don't. And a pretty common condition is asthma, for example. And so I have more patients who are taking care of their kid at home, waiting, being in communication with us, through a patient portal or virtually, saying, I think they're okay. And that makes me very nervous because kids can get sick very quickly and they can change conditions very quickly. And so when they don't come in for routine care, or they're too afraid to go to to get a prescription from a pharmacy, they end up in emergency rooms with asthma exacerbations. And even that can be an agonizing decision for a family, right? They will do everything for their child, like any one of us would, but there's a lot of risk in doing that.
Thank you for being here, Doctor, and for providing your remarks about your experience. And I think, before I turn it over, there is also moral harm being done to the providers of health care, to all of us who are participants in this by virtue of being tax-paying American citizens.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Representative Morrison. I now recognize myself for questions, and I want to talk about legal representation. I try to remind people at every hearing, every conversation I have about the immigration system, that it is a civil system. It is not a criminal system. And as a result of that, people do not get attorneys for free. There isn't a right to an attorney unless you can pay for one yourself, or you can get somebody to represent you pro bono. And it's just particularly abusive when you're talking about kids. These kids' dockets that I've attended have just been horrific. It's just hard to even articulate what that looks like and what kids are going through. And, for years Congress funded a program to provide attorneys to kids in removal proceedings. It didn't cover everyone, for sure, but it was at least a step in the right direction. And we were working towards increasing funding every year. I think when we get back control, we should ensure that every single child is provided an attorney. But I want to ask you, Ms. Donovan Koost, just how the Trump administration's efforts to terminate legal counsel for children has affected your ability to serve these kids.
Thank you for that question, Ranking Member Jayapal, and thank you for your efforts around legal representation for unaccompanied children. And when you get back control, I I will hope to hold you to that promise to provide representation for every child in removal proceedings. So the Trump administration in this term terminated without any notice in February and again in March all funding for legal services for unaccompanied children. Through litigation, we were able to get it restored, but the administration is continuing to litigate that case, continuing to fight to be able to terminate it. Currently, they have put forth a proposal to replace trained lawyers with video presentations and to conduct legal services in a way, or to fund legal services in a way that a mission-driven, expert nonprofit like mine could be able to do it. For example, requiring only one consultation to be allowed per child. Imagine being a child in a detention facility and someone comes to you and says, "Hi, my name's Mickey. I know we just met, but please tell me the most painful things that have ever happened to you." That's it. That's all the time you have. It's being designed in a way to pay lip service to legal representation while really fast-tracking the children's deportations.
It makes a mockery out of the idea of due process at all. Ms. Desai, immigration detention is no place for a child, whether they were raised in the United States or whether they came recently. And one of the most horrifying cases that we saw out of Dili was the case of 2-month-old Juan Nicolas, who was detained after his family crossed the border in January. He contracted bronchitis while he was in Dili, and ICE deported him with his family while he was ill. Can you talk to us about the litigation efforts regarding family detention for recent border crossers and longtime residents alike?
Thank you so much, Ranking Member Jayapal, for that question. In terms of the individual litigation that has taken place, that has been done by individual lawyers, typically filing habeas petitions for children and families. And as my colleague, Ms. Donovan-Kalust, explained, one should not have to go to federal court and file a habeas to have a child released from custody. There is a process in place, both through the Office of Refugee Resettlement and for children detained in ICE custody. This is unprecedented, that the only way to get out of custody is by having to run to the federal courts. So there have been a number of incredible attorneys that have stepped up to do individual representation for children and families at Dili, and they have been very, very successful. So I am not one of those attorneys. I can't speak specifically to that case or to those individual efforts. I will say on the ORR side, when those habeas petitions are filed, often children are released before the proceedings even play out in court because the agency knows that it is at fault and should have released the child before a habeas was filed. In the ICE context, the litigation that is ongoing is in the context of Flores. And as I mentioned previously, Flores is being challenged writ large by the government, which is trying to terminate this longstanding consent decree, and frankly is really one of the only protections for children and family detention, because unlike the minimal protections that exist for unaccompanied children, there are virtually no regulations or legislations that protect accompanied children in ICE custody. So we are really at the point where the fragments, the little that is there to ensure that children are in safe and sanitary conditions, that they are placed in licensed facilities, that they are released promptly, that is at risk of going away. And that is why it's so critical for Congress to step up and to legislate protections, ideally to legislate to outlaw the existence of family detention, period. That is the only real solution.
Thank you so much. We are at time and votes are about to be called, but I really want to thank all of you. Manny, I want to thank you for your courage in speaking up and organizing students at your school, and for being here, because I know it's a tremendous risk to your family and to you. And I think that there are many kids across the country that are inspired by you. I know we are, and I want you to know that we heard you loud and clear, and we're going to make sure that this testimony gets out to everyone. And to the rest of you, I want to say the same thing. Thank you. We all had Kleenex here, and I've worked on this issue for 20 years. I mean, I know the immigration system inside and out, and I still cannot believe that we are doing this to our own children. And I know what the pain must be. I listen to you as an educator. I listen to you as a psychiatrist. I listen to both of you as legal advocates and policy experts. And somebody asked, how is this possible? I think it was you, Mrs. Zern. And I want to say that part of yes, it is Donald Trump, but it is also every single Republican who refuses to address this issue. Let's not let any of them off the hook. It is also every single corporate CEO and every single supporter of this administration that is allowing this to happen, that is being complicit in this. Because when the founders put into the Constitution the idea that Congress would have power, they assumed that the party that was in control of Congress would stand up to a dictatorial, authoritarian president. And that is not happening. And so, I think as a closing statement, I'll just say that the enormity of the abuses and the violations are very difficult to capture. It's why we've already had 7 hearings, and honestly, we will have many more. But very, very difficult. It's such a serious situation, but how beautiful to have your children here as well, your nieces and nephews here as well, to give us the joy of children that every child should be experiencing. The enormity and the abuses of the violations are difficult to capture, and I think we're going to have to continue to make these connections for the country about how on every sphere, every level, we are seeing these continue. We have to continue to call out the profiteering. Representative Castro mentioned this. It's something I've spent a lot of time on. We need to outlaw private prisons for immigrants. That should not exist. These should not be there for profiteering for big corporations that then channel those profits back into this administration that facilitates them. And at the end of the day, when we are back in power, one of the important things we're going to have to do is balance a number of different things that need to happen. Number one, we need defensive reform. We need to stop the things that are happening that should not be happening. We need offensive reform. We actually need an immigration system that works and recognizes the contributions of immigrants to this country and establishes legal pathways for people to come to this country and for people to be able to get citizenship when they've been a part of our communities for so long. And then we also need offensive actions around prosecutions. We need real accountability, because at the end of the day, the people that have been inflicting this harm need to be prosecuted. They need to be brought before us, and they need to be held account for the trauma that they have created, and we are going to have some form of reparation for the kids and the families that have been traumatized through all of this. You talked about how there's no supports for people even once they're released. We need to make sure that we are funding that kind of work to continue to provide relief. And so there's a lot that's on our plate, but I want you to know how seriously we take this issue and how committed I personally am. If I am chair of the Immigration Subcommittee, we will be pursuing all of these pieces. And your efforts, Manny, Mrs. Zern, Ms. Caballero, Ms. Donovan-Kust, Ms. Desai, are not in vain. And we know how deeply traumatic it is for all of you to be in the midst of this and to be having to deal with the effects of all of these traumatic situations. So I want to thank you all so much for being here. I want to promise you that we're going to take your testimony, send it to all the members of Congress, and ask them